I was just sitting backstage with these three brilliant people moments ago and discovered that Kim and Sinead, this is your first time hanging out in person since the book came out?
This is true.
Yeah, it's all true. Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Thank you, pandemic.
We have a bit of a distance. I mean, Sinead lives in Ireland, so it's not easy to get together for tea.
Well, I wanted to start off with a quote from the book, from the intro of the book, where Heather Lee writes, "There is something preciously vulnerable about making a fool of ourselves in the presence of someone who we're a fan of." And she is speaking of Anne Enright's essay in the book about meeting her hero, Laurie Anderson. But she could also be speaking about me in this exact moment right now. Something that I think kind of reverberates through the book and makes it very, very compelling is just how much you feel that vulnerability and fandom through the writing, through all of the essays. And I think let's just start at the beginning. Like, what was the intent behind putting this book together? How did it come together? How did you even start working on this?
Well, it was actually the idea of a man. Lee Braxton, the publisher of White Rabbit, and he came from Faber and he started this imprint, and he had put out my book. And did you work with him before?
No, never before. No.
So anyway, he approached me about doing it and asked me who I would like as a co-editor. And I had actually just met Sinead in Dublin, where I'd been and had a show at a museum there at this museum called IMA. Is it IMA or is it IMA?
IMA, yeah.
IMA, God.
Irish Museum of Modern Art.
Yeah, a fabulous place. And we had done a talk there and, really hit it off. So she was the obvious person to me.
And I mean, there's an insane group of writers in this book. There's Margot Jefferson, a hero, a Pulitzer winner. There's Rachel Kushner, a Booker winner. There is, Maggie Nelson, New York Times bestselling author. I am really compelled by the range of form in this book. It is not all singular. It is not all kind of idol worshipy. I'm really curious how you found and chose the writers and how you thought about form and assigning, as an editor myself, how do you assign to Maggie Nelson, to Margot Jefferson?
Yeah. I think we had a giant wish list, I think, and all sorts of people in mind. And I think that with a book like this, it's really interesting to ask people who don't normally write about music to write about music. So we drew up our list and we split it down the middle and started to approach people, and pretty much everybody that we asked said yes, which is rare, doesn't really happen. And
what was the pitch? What was the prompt?
Well, I think pretty much what it says on the back of the book is that, so much of the narrative around music, and, I'm conscious of sitting either side of two people who've been in this world for a long time and have encountered all the, barriers and obstacles that can happen to women in music. And even when it gets to the music memoir or the music book, for a long time, all those very totemic titles were a certain kind of book. There was a chronology to it. There was almost a hagiography about it. There's a sort of I don't know, it's something very big that was outside of telling the stories that they're smaller and more intrinsic. And I think that, as you pointed out earlier when we were chatting, like, lots of the people in this book wrote about music, but they wrote about lots of other things as well. And while this is fundamentally a book about music, every one of those essays, and that's the thing about essays, they are very adaptable, they're very elastic. As a container, they can accommodate a lot. So I think a lot of people were able to find a way to write about something they loved. And even like somebody like Anne Enright, as you mentioned, is a very serious writer, Booker winner. I didn't expect her to write so... and she wrote about Laurie and about the idea that all of us at some point have literally been very, very struck by someone's work that has just had meaning and impact for years. And that runs through all the essays, I think, the idea that music is this very connective sort of tissue. So yeah, we were lucky. Everybody asked mostly said yes, didn't they?
Yeah, there were some celebrities that that we asked that didn't want to do it. But I think it's better. I think it's actually better this way. I don't know. I think it's interesting because there are, a couple of people that are music journalists, like Liz and Jen Pelly, and I don't know. Everybody has an idea, is affected by music, and there's public music. It's kind of music which is very popular, so you hear it everywhere on the streets, and then there's music that you kind of is sort of private, or you listen to in your home, and I think a lot of the essays kind of bring that idea out. It's music creates its. There's nothing like music. No, it creates its own atmosphere. It's like it brings its structure and architecture, and it's so ephemeral, and then suddenly it's so expansive and defines very specific emotions, but it's also just something you project yourself onto.
Just as a reader, I found the book so incredibly generous. And also I love the essay form. So I was really curious how you got, as you asked, people to use that form in such unique ways, because everybody kind of approached it in a really different way, no? I mean, it was really fascinating collection of oddly different things, but all super generous, Did you were saying that you felt that as well when they started coming in? Did that strike you?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as a form, it has a lot of multiplicity in the way that like a short story doesn't necessarily, and a poem definitely doesn't. There are certain things you have to do with a poem or a short story, and I think the essay allows you to do a lot of things. And I think as the pieces started to come in, it would have been fine if all the pieces, were chronological and looked the same, or the same kind of length and at the same kind of tone and ethos. But very quickly, people decided, and I think people deliberately did that by trying to push themselves. One of the brilliant essays by Juliana Huxtable, the writer, artist, and DJ, is a praise poem for an artist I didn't know. And this is the great thing about working on a book like this. You might think you know a lot about music, and then people come to you with their pieces, and you're like, I'd never heard of Linda Sharrock. I didn't know about her and Sonny Sharrock's work in the 70s. And immediately you run off to Spotify or YouTube or wherever places you can if you can buy music these days. And it was immediately sort of turned into it. So she calls her poem, and I think it's interesting. The title of it is a praise poem for Linda. So it's almost a piece of academic writing. It's like a long mantra-esque sort of piece of reverence to Linda, and yet it brings in all sorts of people too, doesn't it?
It's interesting. I mean, I think people their essays are total reflections of them. She is, kind of a poetess, performance artist, writer, and the piece is really kind of abstract, like her work.
I think that there were two other things that became very apparent to me pretty quickly and then sustained through the end, which was that there wasn't nihilism in the book, and there's so much music writing that is based in kind of the end of things or a bygone era or something that once was. And this felt very, very positive, very hopeful, and as I was remarking earlier, purposefully intersectional. And that is not something that you see regularly. And so did it just happen that way? Was there a purpose behind that?
I will definitely answer that, but I want to hear Laurie expand on why she laughed at the nihilism bit. So what did you think about that, the nihilism? Please say more.
About
nihilism in music.
Oh, nihilism. Yeah. Well, as you've been talking now, I've just been thinking of this to make a wild generalization about how people listen. I was just flashing back for a second on a group of women that I was doing a panel with, right before the pandemic in Texas, and it was writers and women and some musicians who had all been in prison, and it was Chelsea Manning and someone from Pussy Riot, and Nadia from Pussy Riot, and a couple other people, and they were talking about, and I was part of that just because I've worked with a lot of things, people in prison, and we were talking about, they were talking about their experience of being in prison, and it was just so wild to hear such a different perspective, because generally when you hear about prison, it's like, I was robbed, this is just, it was so unjust, it was like so awful, and they were talking about what a positive experience it was, and how they had learned to help each other. It kind of blew my mind, it really did. It was just really, really shocking to hear people talk about prison that way. But then I thought, what is this? It's all women talking about that. And so I think, not to, propose something ridiculous like women are good listeners and so on like that, but I think we are. It's like, I think we're excellent listeners. And I felt that in the book of everyone who was just trying to not grandstand, and just talk about what it was like to hear that stuff, hear whatever they were talking about, in a really open way. So I found that really so thrilling, really, your book. It's like,
I think, weirdly, what you're saying there about hearing all those narratives that you didn't expect to hear, in a book like this, lots of the pieces unexpectedly spoke to each other. There were lots of echoes and sort of parallels, and I think your question about, I think Kim and I right from the start were decided if we'd been asked to edit the book, but it was of no interest to us to fill a book full of people who looked like us and had the same kind of background to us. That was something that was right there from the start. It wouldn't interest me as an editor, so it certainly wouldn't interest me as a reader to read a book like that. So that was an early on conversation, I think. Right from the start.
Yeah, I don't know, we didn't want to dictate what people wrote, but maybe the next edition will be nihilistic.
I have to agree with Laurie. I wonder if it's just that women find their community, and that is part of this woman's work, is just like everyone's searching for something to reach out to or bring up with them. Not to derail, actually, on the title itself, how did that come to be? One of the best Kate Bush songs.
It's funny, Lee Brackstone, again, had done a book of Kate's lyrics when he was at Faber. He used to be at Faber, and he did a lot of great books there, including Kim's Girl in a Band. And there was several emails going around about the title, and I've edited anthologies before. Titles are really hard because you're trying to encompass so many people's viewpoints and, a myriad things. So it's really, really hard. And I think there was an email with Ellie, who worked with Lee, and it came up really early. Like, we did ask about Kate being in the book, but she's Kate Bush. She doesn't have to write essays for anybody. So, but she knew about it, and she's okay with the title as because Lee knows her. But I think that so many things in the book are about people who often struggled, or people who worked really hard to get, like Maggie Nelson writes about a friend who became very successful and died very prematurely. Juliana writing about Linda Sharrock, Liz Pelly's wonderful essay about the Almanac Singers and about how much of that work was rooted in the labour movement and socialism, in using music to be political. As more than just song and celebration, it was used to actually change things and to make people think about legislation and laws. And I think that was one of the things that really struck me, I think, about that women's labour were part of it. It's not just... I think Margot Jefferson, so you mentioned Margot, like her wonderful essay in the book, it's called Diaphoresis, which is the Latin word for sweat, and she writes about Bud Lowell, Louis Armstrong, and particularly Ella Fitzgerald, and about her, the objectification of her body and black bodies, and looking at what her sweat was a reminder of the labour of black women and what she'd come from and where she might go back to if her career ever was derailed. It's a really powerful piece, and again, written in quite an experimental kind of way. So I think the thread of labour and the work that women do, whether that's compositionally or as writers, is very much there in the book, I hope.
Oh, 100%. I mean, one of my favorite essays was on Lucinda Williams, written by a friend and a Pitchfork writer, Jen Pelly. And she navigates what the song Fruits of My Labor, all that it entails, all that it could possibly mean. And in her essay, she kind of lands on the fact that work is definitely an act of love. Being a creative, being an artist is an act of love, but it's also an act of labor. It's a brutal part of like doing something that is emotional and physical work. And I'm wondering, I mean, to make it a little bit personal, the way that Jen put it is creating art within a rigid system or out of financial necessity can make you lose your mind. And I wonder how you all, and especially Laurie and Kim, how you have navigated the act of work in creating art with maintaining your sanity and maintaining like your own inner selves and your own kind of drive without it being something for the public or for others. A complicated question.
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of the only thing I know how to do. I mean, that's not a good reason to do something, but when I was little, well, my dad was a sociologist, and I used to look at his bookshelves, and he had there was a book called Men and Their Work, and I was wondering, what is in that book? Like, I was just like, and, you know, and then later I became kind of interested in male bonding and men playing music on stage, and it's kind of a way to rebel, like instead of writing about women in music. And I don't know, I feel like I just don't think about what people are gonna think of it that much. I mean, there are, like in our practice, I mean, there are certain, obviously, like art historical or formalisms that they get in the way and then you push them out of the way, or, you know, and it's kind of really an intellectual battle in a certain way, but then you just do it, you know, you can only think so much about it. And so, I don't know, like I need an audience, but I'm not really thinking of it while I'm, you know, it's kind of just theoretical when I'm actually making something.
Laurie, I have the same question for you. How are you not tired is my question, essentially.
Well, I think your question was about how do you maintain your sanity, right? I have not, but you know, at all. It's like really hard to do, you know. But and I also don't particularly think of this as work. I never really did when I was starting out as an artist. Not one person I knew, other artists, ever thought we would make a living doing this stuff. Ever. Never. It was not at all like the kind of professionalism that's going on now, at all. So, I mean, and I was really starting out pretty close to the 60s with still that idea of we're gonna dance down the road and, you know, just see what happens. And the people who were going to get jobs were idiots, you know. We felt sorry for them. They were just sad. So I never thought of it as work. I didn't think I was working. So we did call it, I guess, especially in the visual art world, we called it new works. You didn't have to think of a name for your record, like you had to think of a clever name for your record. But if you were a sculptor, it would just be new work, you know? So it was like, so in music you were playing music. But visual arts has a more like puritanical thing of like we're doing something very important and significant, and it's all a lot about work. So I never also knew who I was working for, you know, which is a big issue when you're thinking of work. And I just remember a headline in I think a British newspaper. It was about something like, because of illness, Britain loses something X number of million man-hours due to sickness. And I was like, Britain loses? Oh, you owe Britain your man-hours? Who are you working for? You know, so it's a big question in this world now, which is, you know, hyper late capitalism, whatever we are, but who you're doing this for. So it's become, for me, more of a question than it used to be, because I used to just do it because I liked it. I still do it because I like it. But I do more recently question how it's working in our hyper-mediated culture, where every single thing you do, you have to comment on. Did you like that? How much did you like it? How much do you like yourself today? You know, it's just, you're constantly assessing yourself. And in the sort of self-made surveillance culture that we're in, of like, and it's exhausting, I think. That to me is work. You know, I would say, to be the constant reports on yourself, you know, how well you're doing, and how well the taxi ride just was. You know, you have to comment on that. You know, how do you rate that ride you just had? You know, it's just the assessment and putting things in ranks has become really out of control. So
You're talking to the editor of Pitchfork also.
I know. Well, I have to say one thing about press, which I appreciate when I read it for other people, and I like to read about what's going on. But my life improved 1,000% about 10 years ago when I stopped reading absolutely anything about myself. I have not read one single thing about myself. I didn't even read the thing in that book because...
Oh, the essay about you?
Yeah, because I was a little too close to that. I just found that I just have an allergy to it.
It's called Fangirl, in fairness, so it's about Laurie and as someone who's a big fan, so yeah, maybe you wouldn't want to do that.
It's a fandom. It's a piece about fandom.
It's perfect that she didn't read it, though.
I'm sure it's interesting, but I just find that, you know, when people, I mean, I'm sure that when people come up to you and go, oh my God, you know, I just think it's, I think it's what it is. I'd never take that personally. I just think that person sees someone who's been in the media, they've seen them in the media, and now they're in the third dimension. And they're like, you're in the third dimension, oh my God. And so I just have to go, congratulations, you see the relationship of the second to the third dimension. The media to the real world, you know? That's all it is. It's just like, wow, that world exists and you're in it? You're a person? Good for you, you know? So that's why I try to, I mean, to stay out of the heavily mediated world that is always grinding out opinion, you know. Even though I have to say, I really appreciate good writing, and the worst review I ever got, which was about around the time I stopped reading these, was just the best written one. And I wrote to this journalist and I said, you are wasting your time doing this stuff. Write a novel. 5 years later, about 5 years ago, I got a novel in the mail from this guy. He said, here's my novel. And it was really good. It was really, really good. So, you know, I just think that... Anyway,
he was probably trying to get your attention.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add to that? I saw you.
Oh, I don't know. Just I always feel like I want to leave my body when someone comes up to me, or you know, I just kind of feel like it's more about them than it really is about me. And I'm happy to, you know, I try to be, you know, gracious about it because it is for them. But yeah.
I mean, as Anne wrote, I'll tell you this much. As Anne wrote in her essay about Laurie, she felt like she left her body in that moment. In the moment that she approached Laurie, she said there was this magnetic pull that she had to do it. She didn't know why, but she had to say hello. And I think I can't say what she said that she said, but she said that when she approached you, what ended up coming out of her mouth was something like nonsense, just like blah, 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 blah. So it's like a mutual, a fan and the person being admired both blacking out at once, it seems like. Well, a tangential question to the first part of it, of the last question, which who knows where I started there, is that there's also, in that same Lucinda Williams essay, Jen refers to her as being, quote unquote, nobody's girl. And this idea, especially in years past, of if someone didn't fit into a genre or a scene or was exploratory in the way that they approached their art, that it could really affect their confidence or their art or their opportunity to make art in the future. And I'm wondering, for everyone on stage, if you have had, or if you can remember that like formative battle of confidence with yourself that you won, that you triumphed over, and it can be from any part of your life, but something that felt like I can be nobody's girl, I'm my own, you know.
Well, I guess when I made this solo record a couple years ago, I kind of, I worked with this producer in a way I'd never worked before making a record, and I just didn't know what was really going to come out. I mean, I just, it was, and I didn't really think about how it was going to fit in with the current music scene or whatever. And I took a lot of things that I've been influenced by when I first moved to New York. Because I find those things like no-wave music, you know, bands like DNA, still like incredibly modern. And I was not taught to be a musician. I kind of fell into it, sort of post-punk, the way a lot of people did. And for me, it was also an escape from the art world. But I just kind of, I didn't really think about it, so I was actually really surprised at how well it was received. And I just, I don't know, that's the only really concrete thing I can think of.
Did it feel good?
I guess. I don't know. Like I mean, I'm a constant sort of self-doubter, so I believe in just constantly questioning things. It's just, I just have to get used to it.
Right.
You know, that is the mode.
Coming into a new
that's
skin.
Part of my, you know, makeup, whatever.
Sinead, I'm wondering the same for you.
About vulnerability?
About a moment where you questioned yourself and came through it stronger, essentially.
I wanted to write for years and I didn't write, and I think there's a lot of reasons that hold people back. I think fear is a big one. What would I have to say that anybody would want to hear? And I had a really serious illness in my late 20s. I got leukemia, I had a lung clot, and loads of things went very badly wrong, and it happened very quickly. I just got married, so it was a really terrible time. But I remember my parents were coming in to see me, and I knew my mother would absolutely freak out and be very upset. And I thought, I have to say something to her, I have to present something to her, I have to tell her something so that she will maybe feel, and maybe I was saying this much for myself, and I don't remember saying this, but apparently I said to her when she came around the curtain, I said, I'm not going to die, I'm going to write a book. And again, I don't remember this, and then when I eventually did, I published a book of essays called Constellations, and when I was working on it, she said to me, do you remember what you said to me in the hospital? And I literally didn't. I was like, I don't know what you're going to say to me. And she said, you said that you were not going to die and write a book. And I literally haven't, I don't remember saying the words. I trolled back in my head loads of times, and she was like, you definitely said that. And I think I talk a lot in that book about how illness is a kind of interruption and a disruption. And it, in a weird way, I don't think it ever made me think about not writing again. I think there's a before and after with illness, and for me, I think the before was not writing, not being creative. And it made me never want to go back to not being creative. And regretting all those years I didn't do it, and regretting all the fear and the nervousness around it. And anytime I teach people, a big part of it is people thinking, I can't do it, or nobody will want to see it or read it or feel it. And I think that's the same with making music, it's the same with taking photographs, making film. It's all this Venn diagram of art, but we talk ourselves out of it a lot. And I think what lots of the people did in this book, I think, went to places that they thought they were going to write an essay about an album or an artist, but ended up going quite deep. And I think lots of the writing I gravitate towards that I like is stuff that goes right to the precipice, that is raw, that is vulnerable, that doesn't hold back. And you spot it in writing when someone is telling you something really big and then they don't go right in. You always know it. I have a kind of an eye for it, and I think I see it when writers step back and don't go there. And nobody in this book did that. And I thought there were places that people would, and they didn't. And the conversations ended up being more than we could have expected, you know. There's a brilliant, in your piece with Yoshimi, one of my favorite parts of the whole book is Yoshimi talking about her family and her uncle who predicted the day that he would die, and he died on that day. And just her mother and her father, like you got so much out of her in that piece. It was unreal.
Yeah, that was, it was great because I'd known her for years, and she spoke English, sort of. I mean, we would laugh and have our jokes in the band. But I just always wondered what was it that made her such an unusual, unconventional person in a culture that, you know, favors conformity and sees that as like a strength. And, you know, she was like, oh yeah, I had perfect pitch, but I didn't care. I didn't know what it was. And I played the piano with my toes. You know, I don't know. It was like, and it was so her, you know, but it was all this stuff articulated, and yeah, her whole family was really kind of eccentric.
How did it feel to be friends with someone for so long and then be able to have this like freewheeling, intimate conversation where you were learning so much about them despite having, you know, created music with them? What did that feel like?
I mean, it really wasn't. I mean, it wasn't surprising in a way because she's a very funny person and likes to laugh a lot. But, you know, we did it not in person, so, you know, it was through a translator. And, but, I don't know, it was really like being with her in a way. It was just incredibly deeply satisfying to actually, I mean, I can't wait to see her again. Yeah, I haven't been to Japan in quite a while. But
I was dying at her thinking that the band was named Free Kitchen.
that
was one of my
yeah.
favorite parts.
Yeah.
I also saw a through line in the book when you mentioned Maggie Nelson's essay and her brilliant friend, Lhasa, and Otessa's essay, you know, being formally music trained, but it all came back to this one teacher, Valentina. And you really see in this subtle way through like half of the essays in the book that they all return to a woman who is teaching. And I wonder if there is an early or formative, similarly, musical kinship that you've formed with a woman that kind of informed your perspective and the way that you created art going forward. Laurie.
Well, it was more like visual art, I think, with this person, and it was kindergarten, actually, and it was. I just remember our art teacher, who would come in. Our lives were ruled by bells. I'm from here, from Chicago, a little bit out from Glen Ellen. Yes. And so she would come in like after the bell rang, you know. The bell would ring, and we'd just like little automatons get up and go to the next class, and then another bell would ring. It was ruled by bells, and so she would waltz in, a huge hat, and go, "People, what should we paint? How about something like with just purple? I don't know. And I was like, wow. And then the thing that really, really impressed me more than anything was that she would leave before the bell rang. She would just leave. She would, you know. And I was like, I'm going to be like her. She made a huge impression on me. I decided then to be an artist. It was because she wore crazy clothes, but mostly she was free. She didn't have to follow any rules, no rules at all. And so she's always been top of my head, kind of protecting me as just kind of, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Just come in and paint big things. It was also that it was a woman, I think, that was really made a huge impression. Because most of the women I knew were really the authority figures. You know, they were the teachers going, read this book, the mom, eat this dinner. And on the other hand, generally, the men I knew, especially my father, he was just like a jokester and somebody who loved to have fun. And he let's go get some ice cream. Let's stay up all night. And I thought, wow, men are these crazy characters who have like not a care in the world. You know, it took me a lifetime to realize it wasn't necessarily true. So, anyway, but I think it's those first things that you see about who you could be, you know, and that plants itself in your heart really early. And so for me, she did that, and I think, and I'm somebody who loves teachers. I'm always looking for teachers. Teachers are everything to me, and I've had so many great ones of so many kinds that I'm kind of addicted to people, and I just like to learn from people. So I'm very, very, very grateful to teachers. You know, so she was the first one.
What about, yeah.
I actually can't think of any women who, I mean, aside from, you know, musicians, records I listen to, I can't really think of any woman in my life early on. I mean, there was this friend of my parents who, he had been a student of my father's. My father taught every grade up through high school and then moved on to college. And he was kind of a beatnik. He was a muscle man, and he would visit us. And then then he moved to LA, and he lived in Venice with this woman. I don't know if they were married, but she truly looked like a beatnik. I mean, or somebody's, you know, kind of iconic idea of a beatnik. Long black hair, and she had long red fingernails, and she played the acoustic guitar, and I thought she was awesome. And my mom, and she'd say, come sit on my lap, and my mom, I don't think approved of her, but she was pretty cool.
Sinead, is there someone in your life?
I mean, there's just, I think I spent a lot of time in hospital when I was a teenager as well, and I think that I would not have gone through, if you get sick when you're in your teens, it's a very kind of isolating time, and I think if I had not had books and music, I think I would have lost my mind. And I think people forget, we think of music as this very celebratory, very public thing all the time, and yet, as Kim said, it's very private. Anne Enright talks about it as well as being music is a thing that she only does on her own. She's not interested in going to gigs or concerts, though she was at your Dublin gig a couple of weeks ago. And I think that we forget that it's there at all those kind of massive moments that are often very pivotal moments, like, you know, weddings and funerals, and when people are dying, they want to hear a certain song. And I think that for me, those years were, I mean, it's people like I had a godmother who bought me books and turned me into a reader. I don't think I'd be one, and I'd never be a writer if I hadn't been a reader. You know, listening to Kate Bush as a teenager, and then remembering that, you know, Kate Bush wrote her own music and had a #1 when she was 17. I mean, a teenage girl writing a #1 at a time when the charts were full of songs only written by men or men writing for women. I found she's been sort of a benchmark that's sort of carried me through. I've been lucky to interview her a couple of times, and she's just as you know, and again, that work ethic, that they mightn't be albums every few years, but you know she's always doing things and working on things, and the next thing she does will be something completely different to what she did before. So, oh look, I could be listing people off for a really long time, but yeah, too many, and that's a good thing, you know. And there'll be people coming up in the next few generations who I'm looking to as well, who are making amazing music and making beautiful art and writing incredible novels and stories. So yeah, thankfully they're there.
I'm being conscious of time, so I want to get to 2 specific essays quickly before I'm booted off. But as a child of immigrants, I was especially drawn to Ian Lee's essay and Fatima Bhutto's essay, and both of them wrote about songs from their youth. Ian wrote about finding herself on a road trip, privately singing songs from her childhood in China, knowing that they were propaganda, but finding comfort in them nonetheless. And Fatima wrote about the, quote, bruised longing and joy of hearing cricket anthems from her home country of Afghanistan. And it made me think of, as we were talking about before, Danielle Smith and her great essay about Whitney Houston reimagining the national anthem in the 90s. But all of that writing kind of centers in finding comfort and familiarity, even as your, adult, enlightened brain recognizes that there is something awry within the art itself, or within the context surrounding the art. And I'm wondering if there is anything that you can think of that kind of solicits that same kind of complicated emotion for you. I certainly have that from my understanding of music through my family lineages too, so. Laurie.
Well, it's not like that I really listened to the Carpenters when they first came out, but it was associated to me with bank jingles, sort of, and very conservative, the establishment. But I rediscovered them in the 80s. Because removed from the context of the time, you could actually just listen to the music. And I mean, she had the most beautiful voice and sexy, and the production was very interesting, layered and incredible, kind of advanced for its time. And then so I, got into her story, and I mean, I feel when I hear those Carpenter songs, it really almost makes me tear up. They're so soulful.
Last week I was very briefly in Dusseldorf, and I made a tiny pilgrimage to Kling Klang to see Kraftwerk's studio, and there was a big exhibition on about Kraftwerk and synthesizers, and had lots of old Moogs and Japanese synths, and I think called a cross on air. I was telling Laurie about it. It's a very early theremin, and I remembered I'm going to a festival this year and I'm bringing my children to see Kraftwerk, and I remembered years ago when everybody was listening to pop music and it was all very much Madonna and everything that was on MTV, and there used to be this show on Irish telly that played videos, and one day I happened upon these 4 strange-looking dudes standing behind keyboards, and it was Kraftwerk doing music non-stop, which still remains, I think, a song that I've said I'd have played at my funeral, that has just never kind of left me. And because I hadn't seen anything like that. I was like a 10-year-old girl living in Dublin, and then this song came on, and it's robotic, it's very long, it's very repetitive, and yet I find there's something immeasurably sad about it, and I don't know what it is. And the idea that the music will always go on, I just love it. And it's always, they always play it last at the gigs. It's the last song that they go off to play, and it's the fact that it's endured and it's never changed. And I love everything they've made, but just that song always, like I literally can feel the emotion about it when I hear it every time. And I think it's deliberate that it's the last song when they go off the stage. As they leave one by one, Rolf Hutter is always the last person to go off. But yeah, probably Kraftwerk. I can't believe I've liked them this long.
I am being beckoned to start the Q&A, but I'm going to ask one more question because I wanted us to talk about this. with the recent leaked draft opinion from the Supreme Court and the overturning of Roe and Wade versus Wade seeming imminent, I think that this is on everyone's minds, and something that is frustrating and maddening to us all is that the work of activism and change usually falls to those that are most affected and underserved. And this is something, I've never had to think about in my lifetime. My mom didn't even have to think about it. It predates her, or her pregnancy at least. So I guess my question for you is, as especially Laurie, especially Kim, as people who have seen a lot and who have dealt with a lot of shit, how do you motivate to sustain doing the work, and to sustain the work of being a pioneer, of being an activator of change? I think that's a general question, not pertaining to you specifically, but to women everywhere, I think, who are going to be rallying for the next weeks and months and years to come.
I think there are several ways to react to this in terms of what you do in your own work, or how that might express itself, and what freedom actually means in the things that you make, and how you present that to the world, and whether people can hear that or not. And the second is really just is activism. And I think that I am so impressed by the tactics of Me Too and Black Lives Matter, even though both had to tread over a lot of bodies to get there. It's when I think of Me Too, it's what was accomplished in that short period of time wasn't accomplished in the last 100 years of women saying, you really should respect us. So I'm reluctant to say that it takes that kind of thing, but we're not going to wait around for people to offer a solution. You have to really take it. And I've learned a lot from those two movements, and they do tend to be led by the people who are most affected. So I think that radical movement reaction is necessary. I mean, like lying down on the street kind of thing, because those things work. The last time I was really doing a lot of political work was really 10 years ago. So I've been looking for some in Occupy, and I found that so many people who worked in that were really crushed by it. I mean, I still have friends who have the FBI in front of their house, parked every day. It was like people are determined not to let that happen again. So it has to happen again. So I'm really looking forward to taking part in that, and making sure that we can make our voices heard. When I think of like what's going on now, I feel like the liberal left, the people who used to be speaking out, and let's say our intelligentsia, I don't hear them anymore. Not a word. What happened to them? And so I think it's a really unique moment now, and a really wonderful opportunity to think about what it is that you want and what you're willing to do to make it happen. So I think it's a very, very incredible moment to act.
I agree with Laurie. I think that it's important to activate the corporate Dems, because they've had a long time to get a bill passed to sanctify Roe versus Wade, and they haven't done it. I mean, they're pretty ineffectual all around. Let's just say they suck, and I think they really need to be shook. you know, it's like their job has become protecting their own power and the power of the corporations in this country. And I think it's important maybe to look at the history of labor in this country and see how they grew their movements and what they did and how they, you know, how they came to be effectual. And that is maybe the most optimistic thing that's happening right now, are the different actions to unionize, you know, like Starbucks. And it sounds funny though, unionizing at Starbucks. But it's like, I think they've 25 or 30 stores have already unionized, and one Amazon warehouse so far. And I don't know, I just think that it's all kind of part of the same problem, in a sense. But right now we need to really focus on what's happening with women's rights, basically.
Thank you. I think it is time to take questions from the audience. I'm sorry we ran over. I just really needed for us to talk about that. So I will throw to you.
We have time for 2 questions, folks. So, any takers?
Y'all are amazing. Thank you so much. You're really, really inspiring in a time when we probably need inspiration most. This question is for Laurie Anderson. You don't have to see me. What was that novel? What was that novel that the music critic wrote? The critic who wrote that beautiful but maybe not generous review. What novel did he write? Or she write?
You know, that was 5 years ago, and I'm gonna have to check out what it was. But and it didn't get any good reviews, I have to say. He was kind of depressed about that, which is, anyway, it dropped out of my mind, sorry to say. But I liked the book. I thought it was pretty good.
I think the book was by Eric Harvey.
No.
No?
Hi, thank you all so much for your time. This has been just really incredible. I would love to hear from each of you a piece of work from maybe the younger generation. I'm like 24 myself, so someone younger who has written something or put out an album or done a piece of visual art that has really inspired you.
There's a huge amount of amazing music being made by young women in Ireland at the moment. Denise Chyla, who's a rapper, CMAT, who's like a kind of country pop singer, Pillow Queens, 4 amazing queer women who've been on the James Corden show here, who are brilliant, hoping to do something with them in New York later in the year. Most of the best music coming out of Vanessa Francis. Oh, I could go on. There's loads of young women in their 20s in Ireland making the music. So I also made a Spotify playlist for this book. It's got 230 songs at 17 hours, and there's lots of women on that. So go check it out.
I couldn't hear that.
There's a show in Chicago right now by a young woman in her 20s named Charlotte Fox that you should check out. An art show.
Let's see. I just heard a long kind of audio installation by Gavin Friday, it was a very beautiful political work that you just kind of, it was that you sit around and listen to in a gallery, and generally I find those hard to do. You know, I would prefer to listen to something myself, but in this case it was it didn't matter where you heard it because it was such a powerful story. But I tend to love things that are sort of episodic, and this had that sense of chapters, and it's a funny way to. I think it's just a new way to hear things as well as see things, because so many things not film-like anymore, like 90 minutes. They're series that have 80 things on them, and I think especially the French are super good at that, of their TV series, and kind of like Balzac or something. They're really just really wonderful. And it's just a different way to tell a story, and it seems to be our moment to just be lots of short stories, and I love that kind of form. So it's also what I loved about the book is this short story feel of it, that you had so many perspectives, and it was just really.
Can I mention one more person? Because I saw Laurie play in Dublin 2 weeks ago, and this person played 3 days after Laurie. She's 26, a trans musician called Claire Rousset, who I think is very much an inheritor of Laurie, who was using found sounds and voices and distortion, and just absolutely blew my mind. It was incredible. So listen to Claire Rousset.
One more. Just a reminder, thank you. Just a reminder that we do have a book signing as well in the lounge. You can also purchase this woman's work, Essays on Music, there as well. So one more question. There we go. Here you go. Thank you.
Laurie, one of the wonderful pieces of work that you did early in your career was sleeping in public places and sharing the dreams that those spaces inspired in you. And I was wondering if any of you had any weird or interesting dreams now that we're all living in this very strange time.
It's pretty blurry. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hear from the speakers coming this way.
It was something about unusual dreams in the pandemic.
I don't know if we have that much time. It's the funny thing about dreams, because usually, like, you think they're so fantastic, but then when you tell them to somebody, they're really boring.
I guess that's how my question came out then, my bad. I thought I was being clever.
Oh, you were talking about sleeping in public places, that thing. Yeah, that was just an experiment that I did a long time ago. Also, partly because I was interested in what's taboo, and people don't like it when you sleep in public. You know, you're supposed to wake up. You know, you're supposed to be like, hey, yeah, what? And so I thought, if I could just lose consciousness here, and then I was also interested in how much sound and things, particularly sound, would influence dreams. So I did a lot of that, sleeping in Night Court in New York, a lot of different places around the city. Results inconclusive. It wasn't really science, you know. It was kind of just something to do.
Okay, I think that is all the time that we have. Thank you so much.